I'd like to start us off by acknowledging that I'm calling in from Juneau, from the traditional Aquan Ani, and thank the Tlingit, the Haidas, and the Tsimshians of this region for their continued and ongoing stewardship of our lands. And without further ado, I would like to introduce my few friends that I asked to join us here in this chat tonight. Melanie, I see you on my screen next to me. Can you give us a quick introduction?
Sure. My English name is Melanie Brown. My Yupik name is Taikupa. It means somebody who has come from far away. And yeah, I was born in Sitka and went through the school system in Anchorage. My family's from Bristol Bay. My dad is from the Norton Sound area. My mom is from Bristol Bay. And I return there every summer normally, except I didn't this year because of the pandemic. I felt it was the most responsible thing I could do as a human, especially after the tribes asked for people not to come in during the fishing season. Fortunately, the fishing season was executed as well as it could have been, given the conditions. But I still stand by my decision, and it was really nice for me actually to make better friends with the forest and learn about plants and mushrooms and walk the woods and learn more about this beautiful land that I live in here in Juneau on Tlingit Ani. And I work for Salmon State. And I used to work on the Salmon Beyond Borders Transboundary campaign, but my advocacy work that I do as an organizer, it began because of the proposed Pebble Mine. And because I'm based in Juneau, it was natural for me to work on Transboundary. I'm not working on it directly now, but I feel like it's always there in my work, even though it's peripheral now. When I worked on the initiative, the Stand for Salmon initiative a couple years ago, it pulled me away from working on Transboundary because there were only so many things I could do. And then we made a lot of friends with people in the Yukon-Kuskokwim and my colleagues at Salmon State and I realized that we wanted to do what we could to bring our, what we've learned through our work on other campaigns to help with people who are concerned about the Donlin Gold Project. So that's where a lot of my energy has been going lately. But I've been doing this work long enough now that I've built up a network that has brought wonderful opportunities, even though we are stuck at home during the pandemic. And I've had to learn sort of by fire, as all of us have, how to work effectively in Zoom space. And I've been afforded some really unique opportunities that where it feels like I'm connecting with people, and I'm really grateful for that. I hope I at least provided some background for myself, and I look forward to the conversation that we'll have later on. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, Melanie. And I just might add, I love your Bee Yellowtail shirt. I have the same.
Oh, great.
Great minds think alike, huh? Next, I see Frederick Olson next to me. Can I get a quick introduction from you?
Uthgansi Hinudikyang, place of one's own, is my name in the Haida language. And yes, I'm Frederick Olson Jr., and I'm the executive director of the Southeast Alaska Indigenous Transboundary Commission. And we're a coalition of 15 federally recognized tribes in Southeast Alaska. You can kind of see Southeast Alaska, see this way. You got to point, oh yeah, use the right finger right there. And we're a unique group in that we are a nonprofit, but we're a coalition of tribal governments. And so we work to amplify the tribal voice. And, we've been, since we started in 2014, back then we started as the United Tribal Transboundary Mining Work Group. And in fact, Carrie, who's going to be up next, was the original co-chair. Back then there were two chairs, Carrie and Rob Sanderson Jr. And then I became the chair in 2015 and was the chair until 2018. And then now Rob Sanderson Jr. is again the chair. He's the representative for Central Council, Tlingit and Haida Indian Tribes of Alaska. And so we've been trying to get federal involvement in this issue because, as you might know, the state of Alaska doesn't formally recognize tribes. We don't have any formal consultations with them, or there's no, cabinet position with the governor, anything like that, like other states like Nevada. A lot of states have this. And so one of the things we've been trying is to get the United States to use one of its own tools, the ancient 1909 Boundary Waters Treaty, and get the International Joint Commission to do something in our area. But it's like pulling teeth, but we're still going to dental school, so we're trying to do that. But another thing we've been doing is building relationships with other tribes, and importantly, First Nations across the border in BC. And one of the first things we did was like 2015 or 2016, we signed a memorandum of agreement with the United Tribes of Bristol Bay. They're like us, a coalition of 15 tribes. And then later, 2018 or 19, we signed a similar memorandum of agreement with the Yukon River Intertribal Watershed Council. And they are a organization that not only has American tribes, but has Canadian First Nations. And together they have 73 tribes and First Nations. So altogether, we're 103 tribes and First Nations working together on these issues. And we'll talk more about some of the other relationship building we've been doing. But before I pass the torch, just want to remind everybody that the Tulsa Chief mine is still polluting the Taku River watershed right now as we speak. And even though there's been finally a plan and $1 million or so thrown at this, there's been no activity on the ground. And so we still face that kind of death by 1,000 cuts from that little pond. But thanks, and I won't talk forever right now. Thanks.
Great, and thanks for mentioning Tulsa. I did have that on my list to bring up for later. But without further ado, Carrie Dodson, you gotta give us a quick introduction, please.
Hi, my name is Carrie Lynn Dodson. James is my maiden name, which is what most people remember me by. I'm here representing the Alaska Native Sisterhood Camp 14. I'm also a delegate for Tlingit Haida Ketchikan chapter and a member of Ketchikan Indian community. I am Raven Double-Fin Killerwell. My Haida name is Tot. It's kind of difficult to pronounce, but I actively live our native traditional gathering, and my background here is, the sockeye salmon behind me, and that's a picture of my smokehouse. Our salmon runs are dwindling, and we are unable to harvest the hooligans from the Unic River. They're starting to come back, but they're still endangered. And that was just from small scale mining. And now with the Kara Sulfate's Mitchell mine on the horizon. You know, we may not ever be able to harvest on our own lands again for the hooligans. Food sovereignty is so important to me and to my people. You know, the food sovereignty is our right to harvest our own traditional foods on our own traditional lands. We don't want to go up north to get hooligans. We want to get our hooligans from our own land. But I'm happy to be here today. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, a huge Kinnick and Deutsch and Hawa to you three for joining me. It's a real honor to be here. I know, I think the three of you have been at this much longer than I have, and it's really, truly a privilege to be here. You know, and I think I really, I asked you three to join me today because I know that from what I've seen from the work that's been done by you folks and your organizations and others, we really are leading with a real foundation for Indigenous sovereignty. You know, really to lead with that and our Indigenous values. So, you know, this has been such a strange year for everybody. And I just, you know, want to preface that with, I do have my children in the background and the dog. So, you know, if you hear them, my apologies, but that's 2020 and this pandemic that we're in. I'm thankful to be able to have a job and continue to do this work from home. You know, and I think most of you can agree with this statement, but a lot of our work is traveling, and so this year has looked very different for the work that I do in regards to Transboundary in particular. Last year, BC Premier Horgan introduced some legislation in regards to the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and it passed. I think it's was just about a year ago, so we're at about the 1-year anniversary. And I started off and I worked with primarily the downstream Yunuk and Stikine communities, municipal and leadership councils to pass resolutions. And that resolution was really calling on the BC government and Premier Horgan to not only include First Nations in this legislation, but consider the impacts to downstream communities, to our Indigenous downstream communities. And just to list off the groups that did pass resolutions, this was over this last winter: Wrangell Borough Assembly, Wrangell Cooperative Association, Petersburg Assembly, Petersburg Indian Association, Organized Village of Saxon, Ketchikan Indian Community, Ketchikan City Council, Ketchikan Gateway Borough, Metlakatla Indian Community, and also A&B ANS Camp 14, and as well as SEAC is an affiliate to NWF, National Wildlife Foundation, and we, at their annual meeting, were able to bring forth this same resolution and have that passed as well. Oh, I'm sorry, Federation, not Foundation, for NWF. And so that was really great. And we recently got a sign-on letter sent to Premier Horgan's office, and basically calling upon those same asks. And SCITC was a signer of that, as well as A&B ANS, and so that's kind of what I've been focusing on Transboundary this year. You know, like I said, I usually travel and host meetings and am able to really engage with communities, and so it's been a pretty interesting year for me in Transboundary work, for sure. You know, Melanie, I think you mentioned it in your introduction, just the advocacy work that you've done recently on Pebble. And I think, I think that has a really unique perspective to bring to the Transboundary because of the how well known Pebble is. And, I think most people know, the general size and scope of that. Whereas it seems not so much with some of these development projects on the BC, the upstream of our transboundary rivers. And so I really appreciate you joining us and helping to, blend the two there. And, Carrie, I think that you mentioned it as well, your connection to the UNIC and just speaking to the importance of food sovereignty and tribal sovereignty. And Fred, you are really involved in pretty much everything transboundary as the executive director of SEITC. So yeah, Fred, can you give us a little update on some of the recent things that SEITC has been involved with? I know KSM had a recent comment period. Anything?
Yeah, that's what I was going to bring up. Thanks. And it ties, you mentioned Melanie's work around Pebble, and you mentioned Carrie, and Carrie also brought up the Unic River, and KSM ties those all together. Pebble is on everybody's mind, even Donald Trump Jr. and Donald Trump, they're against it. They're aware of it. And we need to get the KSM mind in people's mind, not minds, but minds, the same way Pebble is. KSM, if built, would be the largest open pit mine in North America. The current largest open pit mine in North America, Bingham Canyon, as far as water management, they have to deal with 2.7 billion gallons a year, where Pebble would have done 13 billion. Well, KSM would do 20.8 billion. It's a little over 10 times as much water management as Bingham Canyon, the current largest open pit mine in North America. This is not your grandpa out there panning for gold. And so we've been, KSM's been on our radar for a long time, fortunately, because, we were then ready for this comment period. We had already sent 2 letters to different BC ministers regarding KSM. They got permitted way back before a lot of the new laws were brought in. The mining laws are all so old, but they've been updated a little bit. But KSM's gotten in, before the Mount Polly disaster happened and woke a lot of people up. And so fortunately, we're aware of it, because what happens is, they dump a 90-page document on you and say, oh, you got 14 days to comment. And then it's you and your assistant, you and another person, or, a tribe. They don't have a huge legal team to deal with this kind of stuff. And so that's one of the things we try to do for our tribes is, it's kind of like speaking for the tribes. We don't really speak for them, but we kind of work on their behalf, of course, because they have designated representatives formally to our group. That's how our group was created. And so we have, commented against the current issue with KSM is that they are trying to get a second construction extension. And the BC laws allow 1 5-year extension. And see, the real issue with KSM, it's a lot like Pebble. It's the wrong mine in the wrong place. And that's why no big investor has stepped in to put up the money to make it actually go. The company Seabridge Gold that owns it, they're one of these companies that, they make a claim, they explore, but they need a big company to throw in the money. And that hasn't happened. And so they got a 5-year extension, and that hasn't expired yet. But they, of all the cynical ploys, they're trying to use the COVID-19 pandemic as an excuse, even though British Columbia has designated mining as an essential activity, and they have exploration activities going on, but they're trying to use, COVID-19 has made the prices of metal go down and this and that. Bull. The prices of gold are just going up, silver, prices are either at their levels when they deemed the mine feasible, or in most cases, the prices are up. And so it's not COVID-19 that's delaying their construction. It's investors realizing there's people like us against this. And if they get involved, they're going to have to deal with that. And that's uncomfortable. And it's not, they don't like that. And so that's one of the things that we've been working on with the KSM.
Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing that. I did just hear, and I know we have Guy on. He might be able to speak to this a little bit more, but I know that Seabridge did just acquire an additional parcel right near there, the Snowfield property. But yeah, it just seems slightly bogus to use this pandemic that we're all facing as an opportunity, for sure.
Can I say one other thing? It's kind of related. And you see, another thing that's going on in British Columbia, they passed legislation, I think it was called Bill 41, but what it did is it makes British Columbia have to implement the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples throughout their legal system, not just mining, but all aspects of their legal system. Well, you cannot implement UNDRIP in British Columbia if you don't include us, because the United Nations doesn't say Canadian Indigenous people. These are Indigenous people. And if you look at this map, all of the Indigenous people, most of the Indigenous people affected, at least by numbers, are us. On our side of the border, I think Southeast Alaska it's over 70,000, somewhere between 70 and 80,000 people live in Southeast Alaska. On the other side of the border in the same area, I think you have about 10% or less or fewer people. And so, that's another issue. When you live in Vancouver, this is way out in the middle of nowhere and it doesn't affect you. And then you read in the paper, British Columbia and Alaska signed an MOU. They handled that issue. No, they didn't. That's a non-legally binding document signed by an administration that was engaged. And at the time, we even criticized them for not doing enough. But boy, we wish they were back, because these guys are not there. No one's in the wheelhouse driving the ship.
And am I correct that the state didn't even comment on this this second request for extension on substantial start?
Right, and they consider, this is administrative. It's administrative checking the box. Our way of life is just an administrative decision to them, and this can be hard to take. It's one thing if our way of life is a cost of doing business, that's also hard to take. You see that with Mount Poly, where, before they built it, they had to go through all this permitting and blah, blah, blah. And they built this huge lake of poison, and the dirt dam broke and then started polluting, ruined the river and goes into the lake. Well, their so-called cleanup, it doesn't bring things back to life. It looks like cement dried. That's what they call a cleanup. But guess what? Now they have 2 pipes that discharge straight into Quesnel Lake. So why even have, I guess we should just streamline everything. Don't even have permitting. Just dump your stuff in the lake, right? But that's like 3-year-olds. We need to have some adults in government, and hopefully that'll happen soon.
I hope that as well. And that's a great transition to, you know, this new Biden transition. I'm not sure if any of your organizations have been involved in any of the talks around this, and also the recent tap for our new Secretary of Interior. Pretty cool. So really looking forward to that if anybody wants to jump in and share.
Sorry, I know I'm not answering your question directly, but I feel like I would like to continue in the vein that that Fred started with this administration, with the Dunleavy administration being absent in decision making around transboundary rivers, and the streamlining of the different permitting processes, and the lack of transparency. I feel like this administration has gone beyond trying to streamline processes or justify their actions through streamlining. There's some perfect examples when it comes to the Donlin Gold Project. One being a water rights permit filing comment period that just ended on the 15th, and so the 12 water rights permits were filed on the first day of December, and only a 15-day comment period was granted. And the applications associated with those water rights permits were not made available for review. And then when they were requested at the beginning of this 15-day comment period, the requester was told that it would take a minimum of 2 business weeks, which basically entails 14 days when you include the weekends. So they basically just stated, no, we're not going to provide that information for you. So all that anybody could comment upon were these 12 water rights applications that named the creeks where water would be withdrawn for the mine workings of the Donlin Gold Project. So that is a really perfect example of what this administration is doing, and then our governor also has fast-tracked he fast-tracked 2 projects under a program called Fast 41 that is intended to be fast-tracking of transportation infrastructure. But instead of nominating roadways, he nominated mining projects to include Graphite 1 out of Council to the far north, in the close to the Bering Sea, and Pebble. And after the Pebble tapes came out, he swore up and down that he wasn't working in partnership with the Pebble Limited Partnership, and yet there's a record of him nominating Pebble under Fast 41. And to me, it just seems evident that there's an endless, there's a bunch of planning that will, if these projects move forward, the infrastructure will become interconnected. And so we're looking at all of Western Alaska having a whole series up and down the coast and into the Western interior, these projects having roadways that connect them. And if our governor has his way, we're looking at the whole western side of Alaska being developed and connected by roadways, and it will vastly change the land, not only the landscape of this land that we love, but it will completely alter the lifestyle of the people, the Indigenous peoples that rely on accessing these lands that stand to be close to them to traditional hunting grounds that they have been able to access, because those hunting grounds will become mineral claims. And I hope you don't feel like I digress too much, but I'm just trying to give more of a flavor of what we're up against under this administration. And it's evident, that, the DEC commissioner's statement of Alaska is open for business, even though his job is to consider the environment and conserve the environment that we live in. That's what we're living under right now.
Right. Thanks for jumping in and responding to Fred's question. I didn't realize that I didn't give anybody a chance to do that. So.
Well, and that's the thing, you have this in BC also. Instead of a government looking out for you, they're cheerleaders, they're promoters. It's conflict of interest. They're not helping us. They're doing everything they can to bend over backwards for the mining companies. And why? But why? Because of the short-term interests. The mining companies have a short-term interest. Every mining job's a temporary job. The mines only last a little bit of time. And then we're stuck with the mess. And similarly, political administration, they've got a shelf life, and they've got to look to the next campaign, and they've got to, do what they do. But just one more thing about KSM and the size. There's a mine that exists. The Red Chris mine exists, it's running, and it could affect the Stikine River. And it has a similar style as the Mount Poly, where it has a huge lake of poison, and the dam holding it back is made out of dirt, from the area. And the wall of that dam is half as high as the Space Needle in Seattle. And that sounds really big. That is big. But guess what? KSM's going to have 2 of those facilities, 2 dams. Both of them are taller. The shortest one is 100 feet taller, would be 100 feet taller than the Space Needle. And the other one is 170 feet taller than the Space Needle. And those are just passive water, long after the mine's running, long after Seabridge Gold doesn't exist, and whoever, helps them out doesn't even exist anymore. Hundreds of years in the future, that's going to still have to be looked at in a seismic area. We have climate changes, bad storms, a lot can happen in 100, 200 years. When something's just sitting there, everything's got to go right for 200 years. And if this thing gives way, bye-bye, eunuch,
Yeah, thanks. So, Carrie, I know the eunuch is your backyard down there in Ketchikan. Do you have anything to add?
Well, there's some wonderful trout fishing areas on the Unic River, and we have many members in our community that have cabins on the Unic River. We're not only facing the threat of the Care Sulfates Mitchell mine, there are Canadian companies that are coming into Alaska, and they have submitted an application for mineral exploration at Helm Bay. And that's just about 10 miles from Knutson Cove on Revilla-Gregato Island. There's mineral exploration on Prince of Wales Island. And so it just seems like they're coming at us from all these different directions. They have all of these powerful, high-paid scientists, mineralogists, and lawyers working for them. And, you know, here we are, you know, tribes doing our best to keep this mining threat away. There's no new, like, sophisticated mining practices. I mean, these are kind of like the same kind of mining practice from 100 years ago. There's no new big fancy technology, and we're just opposed to it. You know, my kids, they're the next generation coming up, and they're very aware of the threats. We need to protect our lands for the next 7 generations, for our unborn children.
Right. Thanks. Yeah, you know, the youth, it's an interesting, you know, I know some folks have been fighting, you know, this fight for quite a while now. And so it'll be interesting to see if folks have a plan for succession, if, you know, we're bringing that next generation of leadership on. I know, I think Tlingit and Haida has some pretty good opportunities for our emerging youth leadership, and I think that they've been fairly active in transboundary stuff, so that's been really great to see.
I just wanted to add in my daughter, Rebecca Estrin. She's 24, and she's a newly elected Tlingit Haida delegate for Ketchikan. So I'm just very proud of her, and we need to have our youth, our next generation of leaders, aware of these problems, you know, across the board, across all the tribes. We need to make sure that that they're aware of what the threats are.
Yeah, and have them, you know, not fall for some of these easy things. Like, you know, when you're a hammer, every problem is a nail. And, you know, mining companies, they talk about jobs, but they should really say mining jobs, you know. And it's interesting, you know, almost all of our critical rivers, the Taku, the Stikine, the Unik, even the Yukon, the headwaters are in Tahltan territory. And the Tahltans, you know, they're very in favor of the Red Chris mine. And that's something we have to watch out. The Red Chris is that major one I was talking about. The dam has, the Lake of Poisons dam is half the size of the Space Needle. Well, the Tahltans are fully employed though. You know, it's working for them. But when you talk to some of the people there, well, they don't need another mine. You see, that's there's all these other mines that BC and the companies want to put in there. And then they still want to use the jobs hoax, but who's going to do the job? The abominable snowman? You know, there's nobody living over there. You have to bring people in, and you have all these issues. You know, what's going under the radar is during exploration. You know, we get focused on, oh, what happens when they're mining and after the mining. Well, before the mining starts, a lot of damage gets done to the earth, you know, with exploration. And you have the so-called man camp, you know, and man camps have pollution, but they also bring social problems to the area that weren't there. And so, you know, that's another big issue. And so what we've been trying to do, we've been building those relationships, as I mentioned before. And one of the things that's been very successful, we've had, and she was my assistant, but then she was my boss, Tis Peterman. You know, she was our first, SCITC's first employee, and then she became the executive director. When I was the chair and she was the executive director. And then when I was no longer on the board, she became executive director. And after about a year, she hired me as a consultant. So I like to say she was the best employee and the best boss I ever had. But one of the big successes we had was these Indigenous Leaders Summits. We had one, you know, the idea was to get US tribes, Alaska tribes, and some from down south together with BC First Nations. And I think it was even Rob Sanderson who had the idea we should have that neutral, neutral territory. So that's why we look to have it in Washington State as sort of neutral, at least with Alaskans and Canadians. And so the first one was held in Tulalip, on the Tulalip Reservation, north of Seattle. And then the last year was in Lummi Nation. Well, those are both north of Seattle. But these are they're growing. We had a couple dozen leaders at our first one, and over 3 dozen at the next one. And everyone's looking for the third one, but it's been delayed because of this pandemic. But, one of the outcomes of the last summit was the group put forth a public statement declaring a state of emergency regarding polluted waters and declining wild salmon stocks. And so we're hoping the world's listening, and especially government. But we're also trying to get, pardon the expression, but regular citizens involved. You'll be surprised. I could go to Wrangell today and give a presentation. Maybe go to Ketchikan and give a presentation. There's people that haven't heard of KSM. It's just the way it is. There's a lot of things you can focus on besides something that sounds negative. But what we've been doing, we're not against mining. It sounds like it. Oh, they're against mining. But, look, I've got an iPhone and, we're using Zoom and we use mining. Mining creates a lot of these things we have. But just like everything, if you drive a car and put your seatbelt on, you're not against cars to have seatbelts. You can do things right. You have speed limits, you have seatbelts, airbags now in cars. There's a lot of safety. And so we need to put safety first with mining also, instead of just profit, streamlining the profit so 3 guys can make all the money and the other hundreds of millions of people have to deal with the mess. And so what we've been doing, you might have heard of our project, When the Salmon Spoke. We worked with a company in New York, Ping Chong and Company, and then also Skeena Wild Conservation Trust and Salmon Beyond Borders. And we put together this video, hour and a half, called When the Salmon Spoke. If you go to Vimeo, you could watch. It's on demand. You could watch it whenever you want. But what it is, it's 4 folks that grew up in the Wrangell area, on the Stikine, and then 4 like Taltan folks across the border. And they talked about, if you want to use the word stories, but they talked about their real lives and on the Stikine. And it kind of puts a face on the river for people. Because again, it's easy to think, oh, that's in the middle of nowhere, do whatever you want. But it's not. The middle of nowhere is right where we are right now. And so that's a big part of the work we've been doing lately, is we're working on another similar project for like the Skeena, the Nass, Taku, the Unik, do some of the other rivers. And then we've had a spin-off, another thread of work. We, like any film, you have the premiere, and then a lot of times you have a panel after, the director and some of the people in the movie. Well, we did that, but we called it a wow-wow. And the reason we use that word is W-A-U, W-A-U. It means conversation, and it comes from the Chinook jargon, the Chinook trading language. Before English was a common language, you had Haidas and Tlinkits and Tsimshian and other nations who spoke their own languages, but they didn't know everybody else's language. But key people knew this Chinook language, and they could trade with each other. And so we like that. And so we use the word wow wow for that. Well, we've been since asked, we just got another invite today. We're going to do one in January. We've done 2 or 3 of these now. And so this wow wow has become kind of its own, it's taken on a life of its own for us. And it's a nice way for people to see that, we're for solutions. You can make mines, but just do them right. Why can't you do things right? Why do you have to be the naughty boy and see what you can get away with all the time? It's just exhausting.
Right. Well, for the sake of time, we're at 10 to 5 here. So I just kind of wanted to throw out a couple of wrap-up questions. Well, actually, I'll ask the question and then I'll answer from a SEAC perspective, I guess. So what sort of things are on the horizon for transboundary work? And I would just like to mention, since Fred brought it up, some of the social impacts of mining, of extractive industry. And so SEAC has partnered and is working on a study that is looking into that social impacts of mining in our region. And so that's something that will be forthcoming from us. So I'll pass it off. Who wants to jump in?
Can I just say something about social impacts? Like, who knows how long it's going to be before the report comes out, that is in process. But in the meantime, it doesn't take much to imagine the ills associated with waves of extractive industries coming in. All you have to do is look back to the onset of the first wave of fur trade that the Russians brought. They enslaved people, they killed people. I'm not saying that that's what's happening now, but what is happening now is basically a continuation of all the waves of extractive industries that have impacted Alaska's first people's way of life. There was the fur trade, there was the gold rush, there was the whaling, timber. Some people would say that fishing was part of that too. But one good thing about fishing is that it is sustainable if managed correctly. Other extractive industries have proven not to be so, even though they could be when it comes to timber. Sorry if you feel that's tangential, but I feel like it's a way of sort of like waking up your mind to the social ills that come along with extractive industries.
Right. And I think this really came about because, over the past couple of years, we've really have tried to raise awareness and, just even mentioning the simple fact that there's any sort of correlation to extractive industries and missing and murdered Indigenous women causes quite a bit of pushback from industry and folks of that nature. So I think the thought with trying to initiate a study was just to really try and have some, something tangible to have to support us when we do go out and make those claims, so that we're not getting so much pushback, I guess would be the way that I would say that.
Yeah, you have different worldviews hitting against each other. We see the sacred headwaters of these major, crucial transboundary international rivers, and they see a golden triangle. Let's go get it, And so now we had in 2019, 2 rivers in Southeast Alaska were on the most endangered rivers list. The Stikine and also the Chilkat. And I'm surprised we'll have to push them to do the Unuk, because the Unuk, boy, it's under siege. And I don't want to, do you have something to say about that, Carrie?
Well, I agree the Unuk should be added to the 2 most endangered rivers, because our hooligan are endangered. We haven't had any fresh hooligan from our own river in over 15 years. So it's a felony. We would get our boat repossessed, and have thousands of dollars of fines to harvest one hooligan. And then, if the Care Sulfates Mitchell mine is built, it's just going to be, a total loss. And Fred, when you added about the man-made or the towns that are going to be where the mining occurs, I mean, there's already a town up in the sacred headwaters of the Unic River from the Bruce Jack mine. And then they're going to be building this other massive infrastructure for the employees and the miners for the KSM mine. So those two towns are going to be merged together, and it'll be like a town the size of Ketchikan. So they're going to create pollution, waste, sewage waste. It's just, the list goes on, and the profit margin is so small for these mines that they cut corners. It's just natural. They're going to go and cut corners, and that's where the threats are, right there.
And how was your salmon derby this year, Carrie?
There was no king salmon derby. We would have been fined heavily for fishing for king salmon, which was like mind-blowing for me, because we've harvested salmon for decades down in Ketchikan, and to not have a salmon derby, this is at least the second year in a row where we had no salmon derby. We couldn't harvest our king salmon, and our precious elders, they're missing out. Our precious elders, missing their king salmon heads. And
I was born in Ketchikan, and the sign still says salmon capital of the world, and if you caught a 40-pounder when I was a little kid, you debated whether to turn it in, because of 70, 60-pounders, that's what won, and Wrangell, it's been several years now, Wrangell doesn't have a derby. And I find us, sometimes people will mock coal mining towns and people, and you'll see a documentary and someone will be standing and there'll be a massive plumes of smoke behind them coming out of chimneys, and they'll say, oh yeah, we can smell that, but it doesn't do anything to you, it's fine. Oh yeah, my aunt has cancer and all my kids have cancer and my dog has cancer and I think I have cancer, but it doesn't do nothing to you. And we think that's funny, and of course it bothers them. But look at us. Look at us now. Oh, that little Tulsa chief, it's not doing anything to the Taku. No salmon derby, but it's not doing anything. We're starting to sound like that. We're not so smart either, are we?
On that note of Tulsa, that is another thing that will be forthcoming, and that'll be an update. Is that correct, Fred? You might know about that.
Oh, what was that?
An update on Tulsa Chief. I don't think that we know a date on when that will happen, but it should be happening sometime soon. Maybe?
Yeah, they want to roll this out because they're proud of this plan. But it's interesting, it's part of my ignorance. I don't know their government system is so different, and it's not always covered in the news. And what happened is we have our elections. It's almost like the tide, the first Tuesday in November in 2024, there's going to be another election, right? Well, they can just call one. And so the BC Premier Horgan, even though he said he wasn't early on in his administration, well, he called one. And so they had what they call a snap election. Well, then that made, the ministers couldn't talk, and a lot of these meetings got canceled. They were going to unroll the plan at Southeast Conference. I think that was one plan A, where they were some Canadian folks were going to come and speak at Southeast Conference, but then that got delayed. And yeah, I don't know when that'll happen. And meanwhile, it's still polluting.
Right. Well, I do want to be conscientious of everybody's time, and I know we have some reporters on that will be hoping to ask some questions. So, you know, just if we could wrap up, like I said, if I could hear from the three of you just about, you know, some things on the horizon. I know Salmon State has a petition open right now to Dunleavy. Yeah, so let's go ahead and wrap up, and thanks again.
Maybe I'll jump in so Carrie or Melanie could have the last word. You know, one of the things, besides what I've been talking about, the wow wows and some other presentations that we're doing, a really big event we're real excited about is that Tahltan descendants of Chief Nanak are going to come down the Stikine to Wrangell and have a meeting with descendants of Chief Sheikhs.
Oh.
And such a meeting like this of clan leaders from Tahltan and Tlingit, this hasn't happened in over 100 years. This is the kind of thing that we've been building towards, and it's taken time. You know, you just don't build trust because you want to. You have to build trust with the other folks. They have to trust you. And it's taken some time, you know, having these summits with First Nations leaders, and then importantly, talking to them and working with them between the summits. But that work is starting to bloom. And so we're real excited about that. We're not sure when that'll happen. You know, it's hopefully a face-to-face meeting. And so that's very hard right now. You know, Canadians can't even leave, and, you know, you're not going to want to come to the United States. It's like the epicenter of the pandemic. And so, but we're, you know, keep that on your radar. And, you know, we're all very excited about it. And of course, we'll make it public when it happens, but it's not really a public event as far as participating, but it's not secret. You know, there'll definitely be a public statement, because the whole thing is about managing the Stikine River correctly, you know, and our people and the Tahltans, the Tlingits, they did that. And so they're looking to keep doing that. And that's what we've been doing, is we're not making relationships, we're rekindling and rebuilding traditional ancestral relationships that we had before. Hala, thank you very much for this chance to talk.
Thanks. Carrie, I'll ask you, you know, if there's anything on the horizon, or if there's anything that you would encourage any of our listeners today to, that they can do to advocate for our clean waters, shared watersheds.
Well, the Alaska Native Brotherhood and Alaska Native Sisterhood will always stand behind protecting our watersheds. And with all of the Native tribes and the cities, the boroughs, fishing industry getting behind protecting our headwaters, because there's so much under threat. It isn't just our traditional foods; it's the livelihoods of the fishing industry and the tourism industry in Southeast Alaska. I think we should go back to these different organizations that have submitted resolutions in support of protecting our sacred headwaters. We need to go back and have them reaffirm it again. Was it a year or 2 years ago? Should they reaffirm it to just to show that, you know, they're still in support of protecting our transboundary rivers?
Right. Thanks. How about wrap up from you, Melanie?
Oh, just, I know you had mentioned that you were hoping that we could bring the concept of just transition into the conversation. And I feel like you know, it would be a lot to go into, but I can try to nutshell it because I feel like it is so connected to what we've been talking about today. The idea of just transition has to do with the fact that we know we are going to have to transition as a people from non-renewable fuels because we're reaching the end of the oil and gas extractive part of our you know, but what we draw from the earth, and we're going to have to shift to other types of energy. So that's a big part of a transition that we're anticipating. COVID has accelerated the fact that we have more opportunity to transition into better ways of living. But the transition that we're going to go through, it's not automatic that it will be just. And so we all have to work together to ensure that the transition will be just and equitable. And a lot of what we've been talking about today highlights the inequities and the injustices that are systemic, that we've all been grappling with since, you know, not long after the COVID crisis began. It's all intertwined, and it all points to us and our need to start working towards defining and implementing better economies. I think a lot of us have this mindset that economy only has to do with money, but the root of the word, part of the root of the word has to do with our home. Like if you look back to the Latin roots of the word, eco and nomi, the nomi part means home. So it's important to envision, you know, like the home that we want to build, the home that we want to live in, that serves all of us instead of the 1% or the very few executives of mining projects. They're the only ones that they get the profit up front, and then the people end up bearing the burden of the damage that's done at the end of the project. Yeah, the thing that draws people is like the stimulus of jobs and money getting moved around, but in the end we find ourselves in a deficit from something that's being touted as a benefit. So these are all things that we as people, as Alaskans, as Indigenous people, as non-Indigenous allies, we need to come to terms with. And it may seem outside of this conversation, but I see it as something that it should be encompassing conversations like this when we have them. And I really do hope that one positive thing that comes out of COVID is that we have this time to envision a better world for ourselves and better ways of being.
Thank you so much, Melanie. And you know, the Just Transition Summit that took place up in Fairbanks was like the last trip I think that I went on before this.
That's a long time. Wow.
You know, and I agree wholeheartedly that, you know, that this really needs the Just Transition framework needs to be a part of all of our conversations that we're having, you know, going forward, and in particular when it comes to talking about resources. So thank you very much for bringing that up. And again, thank you three for joining me. And like I said, I